On the podcast, we have Michael Hanrahan, who is a self-publishing expert and the founder and managing director of Publish Central. He is based in Melbourne and he's also the co-founder of the Australian Business Book Awards. Thanks a lot for coming on the podcast, Michael.
Great. Thanks for having me, Jess. I've been listening to some episodes, so it's great to be on here.
What prompted you to set up Publish Central and what year did you set it up?
So Publish Central, well, me running my own publishing business has been going in various guises for about 22, 23 years. I started as a freelance editor, then doing editing and a little bit of typesetting, then moved into doing more self-publishing. So that kind of happened a little bit by accident. We started noticing I was doing, one or two self-published books here or there. And then I noticed I had a patch of doing like 3 or 4 back to back. And so I was like, oh, hang on, this was about 10 or 12 years ago. Self-publishing starting to become really, really popular. So that's getting really interesting. So that was when we switched into self-publishing, 100% self-publishing. So I stopped working for the major publishers. So I was doing work for Random House, UQP, all those sorts of people. So got rid of all of that and switched completely to self-publishing. And then we rebranded as Publish Central about 9 or 10 years ago to really focus on the self-publishing area of things.
Wow. Okay. And what kind of books do you publish there? And is there a couple of favorites that you could share with us?
Yeah, so we specialize in what we call self-publishing for small business. So again, that comes from my background at John Wiley & Sons. We have in recent years kind of expanded a little bit more into, we've done a few memoirs and that kind of thing. So more these days, general non-fiction rather than exclusively business. So in terms of favorite books, I grabbed a few when you mentioned this. So I've got 3 here. These are favorites for different reasons. It's obviously really tough to choose your favorite book that you've worked on. This is a book called George to Betty, which unfortunately is backwards on your screen, but people will get the idea. This is a fascinating book. So this is 2 sisters who, disappearing. 2 sisters who gathered all the letters that their dad had written to their mum during World War II and had them transcribed. So you can see there, they've got all the letters. So they came into our office with all of these envelopes and we had them scanned and everything. So it was an absolutely fabulous project. It was really, really interesting. So just in terms of a really, really interesting book, that's one. So you can see it's a hardback as well.
Who's the author? Because I can't see the author.
So they're 2 sisters. So Mary and Jennifer Lush. Yeah, so gorgeous hardback book. So that took about a year and a half, that book, because they were so painstaking making sure everything was absolutely correct. So
are there any letters from Betty to George? Or is
there are a few, yes, there are a few that go back the other way, but it is certainly 97% George to Betty. There's probably 200 letters in here altogether. It's absolutely, and it's a really good little history lesson as well. So it's an absolutely fascinating book. So that was one of them. The second one I picked out was, you're probably familiar with this. I know you've spoken to Andrew.
It's on my shelf too.
Yes. So this for me was particularly more a personal one that we do a lot of work with Andrew. We do a lot of work with his authors. So it was a particular honor when he asked us to help with his book. So for me personally, that was a fabulous project. He did a hardback version as well, which I don't have on hand, but he did a hardback version.
Limited edition, like 50 copies or something.
Yeah, it looks fabulous, and it was the first hardback Andrew had ever done himself, so he was very excited about it. So that was all a really good, again, fabulous looking book. Really, really good fun. This was actually done during COVID, so unfortunately the launch we had in inverted commas was out in our driveway here outside our office, getting books out of the boot of our car because we weren't allowed to get together in big groups.
Throwing them? Did you throw them to people?
Exactly right. Not allowed to get within 10 feet, so we threw books to each other. But that was personally a really good fun. And just the third one that I picked, just because it's such a beautiful book, is The Naked Truth About Breast Cancer by Jane Marshall. Now, very sadly, Jane passed away just recently. But it's a really tough story. But in terms of the book, she put probably 2 or 3 years work into this. Had a friend photograph her whole journey.
Wow.
So it's a really raw, honest book about what she went through.
Is
Um,
it memoir? Is that or
no,
self
it's not. It's
or
not so much memoir. It's specifically about her. It's a bit hard to describe actually. It's specifically about her cancer. I mean, I hate the word journey, but her cancer journey. So
yeah.
she talks about the day she got diagnosed, the day so operation day. So really, most of these books people say it's a really open and honest account, and it's kind of not. This one really, really is. So it really goes into great depth, and just a beautifully produced book.
Yeah.
So that's
Cover. Who designs the cover? Do you know?
so she had her own. Jane had her own designer, so I was involved in the process, but she had her own cover designer. Some authors come to us with
Yeah.
their own cover designer. Obviously, we've got a team of cover designers as well, so we fit in wherever we're needed. So if an author comes to us already having their own cover designer, that's fine. Or if they don't, obviously we use one of ours. So
Sure.
yeah, but that's just in terms of, again, another absolutely beautiful book.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so that's really diverse nonfiction. You must love the
Yes.
variety. Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. So, like, say the self-publishing for small business. Honestly, that's almost a little bit out of date now. We're more just general non-fiction. Like, so we've done a lot of memoirs the last few years. We do the occasional fiction book. We've done a couple of novels, done a couple of kids' books. So, I'm happy to look at any kind of project, and if I look at it and I think we can do a good job of it, then we'll take it on. But having said all that, still probably about 80% of what we do is business books.
And that's probably representative of the fact that nonfiction is the giant genre of book sales as well.
Absolutely, it is. It's definitely part of that. It's also part of the trend of business authors writing, so business owners and entrepreneurs writing books. So that's grown massively in the last, 5, 6, 7 years. You don't have to be. It's not just Bill Gates and Richard Branson and all those guys. These days, average, sort of small business owners and that kind of thing can write and publish a really good book.
Yeah, because it's a real differentiator for them, would you say?
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, so I was just listening to your conversation with Jackie Lane before on the podcast, and she was talking about how these days books still, even these days books have a lot of credibility. So, and that's still true to this day. So even with, social media and blogs and, everybody's all over the internet these days, people are still impressed by a book. So if you walk into a meeting and take in a book, people still go, oh, wow, this is fabulous. So they still definitely have that extra level of credibility.
I love how Andrew talks about the thud factor.
Yes, yep, thud factor. That's one of his favorite terms. His books definitely have thud factor. It's so true. It's just, I've been in this area of publishing, if you go right back to the start, 27, 28 years. Nothing gets the interest that a book does. It's still, like, say, even today when everybody's, publishing online and all this kind of stuff, still having a book does something that nothing else does.
It's amazing. I also think it's amazing how a book launch will move people. Like, people will get on a plane for a book launch. Like, when my client Holly Dean Johns had her book launch, her aunt and uncle, who she'd not been in touch with, I think, for 15 years or something, got on a flight, which they also had not done for a while, to come and see her, to come to her launch. Like, of course it was Holly, but my family came to Sydney for mine. Like, it's amazing that and that's why I love book launches. Better than a birthday party.
I agree 100%. Book launches are fabulous. We've actually got one this evening, which we're very excited about. Book launches. It's a book called A Hell of a Lot of Glass. I think I've got a copy here, actually.
Hell of a lot of glass.
Yeah, so it's about the glass ceiling for women.
Fantastic.
So that's launching this evening. So we're heading off to that one tonight. So looking forward to that. Book launches are great fun, and like you say, they generate a level of excitement that you don't see in a lot of other things. I went to another one just last week and chatted to a few people who said, this is the first book launch I've ever been to. People just, on average, people just don't go to a book launch. So they're all very excited to turn up and see what it's all about.
I love it.
Yeah, me too.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So tell us about how you've helped these authors. Do people, when they come to Publish Central, is their manuscript finished?
Theoretically, yes. No. So we get involved with projects usually when the manuscript's ready to go into editing. So that means most authors we work with have spent 2, 3, 4, 5 months writing the book.
I thought you were going to say years.
No, some of them do, but no, most of them, I mean, the average is, obviously sort of, 6 months would be an average, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
But, I encourage them to get it to a state that they're happy with. So it doesn't have to be finished as such. The worst thing an author can do is spend another 2 months trying to make everything, perfect. Oh, I've got to redraft this bit. I'm not happy with that kind of thing. So I get it to a point that you're happy with and then work with your editor to get it the rest of the way. So authors come to us usually at that point. And then what we do, a full package with us, so taking up all of our services, is editing, proofreading, cover design, interior design, printing, and distribution services. So that's what we do for most of our authors. As I mentioned, if an author has their own, cover designer or their own printer or whatever it is, we're happy to fit in wherever we need it.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so this episode, you're going to explain to us what is book production? What are all the elements that go into that?
Yes, yeah, of course. So book production is basically all the steps that I just ran through. So I'll do it again a little bit more slowly. So editing and proofreading is obviously, working with the words. So working very closely with the author. People sometimes think editors just go through and fix the spelling and put the commas in the right spot and that kind of thing. Obviously, it's much, much more than that. An editor's going to work with you closely to make the book as good as it can be. They're going to talk about the structure of the book, whether there's repetition in there, whether you've missed anything out, whether it's too long or too short. These are all things that your editor is going to look at and all conversations the editor will have with the author. In terms of how much editing a book needs, the spectrum's kind of like this, as you would no doubt know. We have some books that come to us. I have a couple of wily authors who were opposite ends of the spectrum. I had one guy who'd come and kind of just dump a pile of junk on my desk and say, turn it into a book. And it's like, well, that's fine. It's just going to take longer, but that's his editing process. And then another author who'd written probably 20 books or more. And he was meticulous. And if I edited the whole book, it had to put in like 4 commas. I was surprised, kind of thing. So the level of editing, people sometimes say, oh, how much editing does a book need? Like that's kind of the spectrum. Yeah. Proofreading is obviously a read through so it's a completely separate person. So your editor cannot proofread your book. That's very, very important because your editor may have made a mistake that if they try and proofread it, they're not going to pick up their own mistakes. So proofreading is done by a completely separate person who hasn't been involved in the book at all at that point. So again, very, very important that they're completely unfamiliar with the book so they can come to it with fresh eyes. Our proofreaders, they only know a book exists when we email them about 2 weeks before we want them to proofread and say, hey, this book's going to be ready. Can you proofread it for us in 2 weeks? So
for jury duty, Michael.
Exactly right. Yeah, they've got to come to it with a completely fresh set of eyes. By that point, the editor, the author, the publisher, the project manager, whoever it is, they've all been working on it for 2 or 3 months. And because of that, you could have pages upside down and you wouldn't even notice kind of thing. So you really need that fresh set of eyes. So that's editing and proofreading. Obviously, cover and interior design is pretty obvious. We have a cover design process with our authors. We usually go through about 2 or 3 rounds of design to land on a concept that they're happy with. And then there's usually about 2 or 3 or 4 rounds of refining it and tweaking it and trying to get it right. So that's the cover design process. Interior design is, again, same sort of thing. We go through the design with the author until they're happy with it, and then we format the book for them. So a book like this, so it's about talking about with the author about, what fonts do they want for the headings and spacing and all that kind of stuff. And you can see here, this is very cool in this book. So you can see the glass pattern from the cover has been repeated on the chapter pages. Yeah. Really cool. So those sorts of things that you talk through with the author. Because we're a self-publishing company, the author's very heavily involved in those decisions. So if you go to a major...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just about to ask you how it
Yes.
compares to when, yeah, please tell us.
Exactly right. You know what I'm about to say. If you go to a major publisher, they're not going to have those conversations with you. Or they're probably not going to have those conversations with you. They will design the book and send, excuse me, send it to you. Um, Everybody in publishing has heard stories of authors who hated their book cover, and the publishers just say, well, look, we wish you liked it, but if you don't, that's just too bad, because we're the book experts, we're the marketing experts, and this is the cover on your book. So it's a very look, obviously I completely understand that, and I have been on that side of the fence when I was in-house at Wiley. So it's not unreasonable, but it is very dispiriting for the author, and it can put them off their own book. I have seen that happen. It's, they don't like the cover, they don't like the title, and you can see them look at their own book and kind of go, yeah, here's my book kind of thing. They're not that excited about it.
Because the title of the book can also be chosen. It can be a different title to the one they imagined. With the book, I think it's a Firm Press, Loving My Lying, Dying, Cheating Husband. The publishers persuaded her, and my gosh, it's a cracker of a title, but I can imagine the feeling she must have gone through. She probably had, letters to Andrew or something.
Yeah. Yeah, that absolutely happens. I experienced that firsthand with my dad. So my dad was a writer, and his first book was published by, they don't even exist now. What were they called? Octopus Publishing. They were owned by Heinemann or somebody like that. This was like 35 years ago. He hated his title, hated his cover. He didn't have any say whatsoever. Like, they tried to talk, and they were just like, no, we're the publishers, you're the author, you sit down and shut up, basically. So,
do you know what I was thinking? That it is a bit like having someone else plan your wedding and say, we are the experts, we know what will look beautiful, it's got to be these flowers, you've got to be wearing this.
Yeah.
But so personal, your book is so personal, you created it, you birthed your book.
Yes.
And to be told, even by an expert, let's say they really are the final say in taste, and the wedding would be more tasteful, but that's not the point. The point is that it's your day and it's your book, and you want it to be your way. So that's I defer to the client, unless it's that sort of, this could be defamatory, you need legal advice type. Everything is, I say, it's just my professional advice, but you have the final say. It's your book.
Yeah. You're absolutely spot on. We do exactly the same thing. To be honest, we occasionally have authors who do things with their covers that we, don't think are the best choices. We will tell them that. So what we will do is we'll send them the design, and we'll send them their new designs, and we'll say, hey, look, honestly, we know you asked for this, but we think the ones we sent you last week are better. We suggest you go back to that. And half the time they'll say, oh, okay, thank you for the advice. And they go back. And the other half of the time say, no, I love this new one. I want this new one. And at the end of the day, it's self-publishing. It's their book. So we say, yep, okay, we've given you our advice. Go for it. The way I describe it to authors is I will push back to the extent I think you're doing something silly. So if I think you're doing something really, like you say, obviously defamatory, that kind of stuff's extreme. But, if you're doing something that's really amateur or will look like 1980s terrible self-publishing, we do sometimes go back to our authors and say, look, you just can't do this. Like, it's not going to look good. It's not going to work. We very, very strongly suggest you don't do this. And again, even at that point, they can still say, yeah, okay, thank you for the advice, or no, I don't care, I'm still doing it. So again, that's the tradition. That's the difference between traditional publishing and self-publishing. My dad jumped up and down and kicked and screamed about how much he hated the title, how much he hated the cover design, and the publisher just shrugged their shoulders and said, we don't care. So, like I say, they would prefer it that you did, but at the end of the day, if you don't, that's just too bad. So that was getting really off track. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah, so the book production process. So that's the cover and the interior design. Then we get onto printing. So I know you want to get into a bit of depth on printing later, but we organize the printing for our authors. So that involves conversations with them about, obviously, how many copies do they want, what kind of paper, is there any color. So Andrew's book's got embossing on the cover. So, if there's any extras like that.
Yeah.
And then once all those decisions are made, we've got 4 distribution options, we call them. So we've got bookshop distribution, we've got ebooks, we've got print on demand, and we've got an audiobook partner who we work with. So they're basically the 4 ways to get your book out there these days.
Yeah, amazing. It's just so exciting. Could you tell us about the timeline, the typical timeline from publishing book from the time the manuscript is complete to someone walking into a bookstore and buying it?
Yes, so the typical turnaround time is 3 to 4 months. So that is exactly as you described. That's a manuscript coming to us ready for editing, to the author having physical books in their hands. So for a standard project, so this is not a book that requires heavy editing or a really complicated layout or fancy printing, something like that. So this was, for us, this was a stock standard project. Nothing tricky about it, nothing complicated. So for a book like that, it's about a month for editing, about a month for internal formatting, about a week for proofreading, and about 3 weeks for printing. And then we always build a little bit of wiggle room into the schedule, because authors, their mum gets sick or, they have a busy week at work or whatever it is. So roughly 3 to 4 months.
Yeah, which is fast. It's fast.
It's extremely fast compared to the major publishers. Major publishers, you've got 2 steps in the process that take a long time. Number one, their production processes are much longer just because they're a big company and everything's big and slow. But even from when they agree to do the book, they might not even start it for another 6, 8 or 12 months. So, because they've got long-term publishing schedules. So
they might not even start it. So they acquire it and then it's just...
Yeah, because their publishing schedules are planned like 12, 18 months in advance. So if you go to a traditional publisher and they say yes to your book today, you might not have it in your hands for 18 months. Whereas if you sign up to a self-publishing company today, you might have your book in 3 or 4 months. So I'm definitely not excessively critical of traditional publishers. Some self-publishing companies go, traditional publishing is terrible, you shouldn't do it. That's not true at all. There's, what's right for each author and their project. But if you're looking to get your book out there quickly, obviously that's a significant consideration.
Sometimes I think with nonfiction, it really is time sensitive.
It's much more important for nonfiction, for sure. I mean, for our business authors, not having their book in their hands, it's literally a business cost. Like if you take 18 months to, get your book in your hands as a business author, that's, 12 months that you could have had it and you don't. So that costs you all sorts of ways. Number one, just the time that it takes. Number 2, the book can date in that amount of time. Some books are very time sensitive, all that kind of stuff. So if you've written a novel and it's your dream to get published by Penguin and you've spent 5 years writing it, you're not going to care that it takes 18 months for the book to come out. But for business authors, that can be a very significant consideration.
Yeah, because you'd have your next one ready by the time they're ready to go. And then
exactly right. Yeah, we work with a lot of authors who do have kind of a publishing schedule of every couple of years. So yeah, that's absolutely right.
I mean, because as a journalist, that timeline just, for me, I can't imagine sitting on a story for 18 months because the story would therefore need to be updated. So it suits me better. Also, I'm impatient. So
yes.
Where do you print your books?
Yeah, so we have 3 or 4 different printers that we use. We don't have one single printer. So the factors that we consider are every book that comes in, one of the first things we look at is printing. So I actually plan our projects from the end and work backwards. So one of the first things you've got to work out is the printing, because if you don't plan the book around the printing, you can do things in your editing that mess up your printing, or you can do things in design that mess up your printing. So the thing to do, and this catches a lot of people out when they don't get the right advice, is plan your printing first and then work backwards, because then you know what decisions you need to make along those steps. So the sorts of things we look at, so this book was printed offshore. I think she printed 1,500 copies from memory. So large hardback colour books mostly are printed offshore. These 2 were both just printed in Australia with one of our Australian printers. Standard black and white books, 400 or 500 copies for the first print run for each one, I think. This one was printed in Australia because they only printed 100 copies from memory, and most offshore printers won't even talk to you if it's less than about 500 copies, because any savings that you gain from the offshore printing, you lose in shipping the books over. So it's just not worth it for 100 copies or something like that. So the factors that we consider for who prints a particular book are how many copies they're printing, whether it's color, whether it's hardback. Also the time frames. Obviously, offshore printing takes a lot longer. So as we just talked about, for some authors, that's a real problem. So we don't have one printer that we use. We have, like, say, 3 or 4, and we look at each book and we work out where it should go.
And you don't use Ingram Spark or Amazon?
No, we do. So Ingram Spark are one of those 3 or 4. Yeah. So we use Ingram Spark for 2 things. Number one, we use them for ebook and print-on-demand distribution. Yeah. But obviously that's completely separate from using them as a printer. So once our authors are set up with Ingram Spark, we've got one author, his books are delivering just this week. I think he only wanted to print like 25 copies to begin with. So 25 copies, obviously that's an Ingram Spark project, because we find for around about 100 copies or fewer, Ingram Spark are cheaper. Once you get over about 100 copies, something like that, our other printer gets more affordable for our authors. So yes, we do. Ingram Spark are one of our options that we look at for each book.
Ingram Spark are on the podcast today.
Oh, okay. Who are you talking to?
Chris Munnery.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, Chris.
Yeah. No, I was excited for that. And they're just near you in Scoresby, right?
We're in Surrey Hills. So they set up a new plant just before or during COVID, I think. So they've got a fancy new plant down in Scoresby. We went down to have a look at it after it opened. It's all very, very cool.
Yeah, I really want to go and have a look.
Yeah.
Okay, so and just to be clear, because you said you work backwards, so for self-published authors listening, if they were going to do something similar, that's because you book the job in and then it's firm and you need to make sure everything is ready.
Yeah, exactly right. So the way we do it is I'll have so we have pretty detailed conversations with authors before they sign up with us. Because obviously we've got to make sure they're right for us and we're right for them. So we often work that kind of stuff out before an author's even signed up with us. But that's not a problem, because if they do sign up, it's almost a head start on the project. So so the questions I ask authors, the minute I know it's going to be something not standard. So we ask them, how many copies, what size, hardback, paperback, all that kind of stuff, and we go through all that with them. Most of them, most authors aren't aware of the intricacies of how all that works, which is fine. That's our job. So what happens is we go through all of that with them, and then we say, based on this conversation, I think this book should be printed offshore, or based on this conversation, I think you're only doing 25 copies. That's an Ingram Spark book, that kind of thing. Yeah. So it is one of the very first conversations we have with our authors.
I see. Now, I am interested to hear how you describe these services, because yes, they're self-published authors, they keep their royalties, they own their IP, but they're not doing this alone. They've got you.
Yes.
And Publish Central. So do you see it, and do you call it hybrid publishing, or?
No, we very, very specifically stay away from the term hybrid publishing. Because we're not a hybrid publisher, so we are 100% self-publishing. So, and it's a really, really important, and it's a very good question. It's a really important distinction to make. And for people who are listening, who are just looking into the self-publishing world, it's very important to understand the different publishing models. So, self-publishing, the way I describe it to authors who don't quite get it, is I compare us to a website designer. So if you get a website designed, like, they'll do the design for you, they'll do the hosting, they'll get it all set up, but it's still your website. Like, it's not their responsibility to put, the content on there, all that kind of thing. It's your content. You still own all of it. It's yours after it comes out. So that's kind of, we're the equivalent. We're the people who produce your book. So that's very different from us being the publisher. We have a lot of our authors who do call us their publisher. To be honest, I correct them a few times and then I give up, because it doesn't matter what you say, they just still call us the publisher. Yeah. But the authors we work with, the definition of the publisher, I mean, obviously, there's all sorts of definitions, but a definition of the publisher for me is the person who makes the decisions about the book. So how many you're going to print, all that kind of stuff. You make the decision to put it out into the world. So I'm actually going to produce this book. and the person who pays for the production of it. So none of those are us. We don't do any of those things. We advise our authors when they're making those decisions. So the difference with a hybrid publisher is they will, and this is where hybrid publishing gets really tricky. Hybrid publishers kind of get involved with all of that stuff. They act like a traditional publisher, but they also let the author get involved in the decisions and that kind of thing usually. Then they will take a cut of the sales once the book is sold. So we don't take even 1% of sales. So we pass it 100% onto our authors. Again, that's an important part of us being a self-publishing company. The reason some self-publishing companies do actually still take a cut of sales. The reason we're emphatic about not doing that is we don't think we should make any more money if the author does some great promotion and the book sells well.
Yeah, I agree. As an author, I never got why a traditional publisher gets this lifetime cut of royalty. They just do some work up front.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So it is where authors can get really caught out with hybrid publishing. Hybrid publishing in and of itself isn't problematic. Like there are some very good hybrid publishing companies out there. But if you are going to get caught out, it is quite often with hybrid publishing. So what happens, the worst stories you hear are an author pays like $15,000 or $20,000 to a hybrid publisher. So they've basically paid for the production of the book, and then the publisher shares in the profits. So basically the author's paid to produce the book, and then the hybrid company is taking a slice off the top, which is very unreasonable and very rife for exploitation of unwary authors. So, so like I say, hybrid by itself isn't necessarily bad, but it is where a lot of authors get caught out.
Do you think that the definition of hybrid is fixed yet?
No, I don't think the definition of publishing is fixed yet. It's changed a lot in the last, 7, 8, 10 years. It's changed massively. I see people doing all sorts of things. Like you see people doing books with multiple authors and the authors all contribute. You see some of the larger publishers now are verging into hybrid territory with authors having to agree to buy back copies, which is, again, it's all about definitions. Effectively, that's kind of becoming hybrid publishing. So,
I know, right?
Yeah. So absolutely.
So it's just weird to me that the idea of back in the day, a self-published author had 3,000 copies of their book in their garage, and now traditional publishers are saying you've got to pay for 1,000 copies of your book.
Yeah, exactly right. So it is.
And self-published is print on demand, so there's not excess stock.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, most of our authors, in terms of quantities, most of our authors start with 200 to 400. One thing that's changed the publishing industry, or the self-publishing industry especially, radically in the last few years is high-quality digital printing. So a self-published author, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I could spot a digitally printed book at 20 paces kind of thing. They looked terrible. Bad binding, colours were terrible, the paper was terrible. They were just cheap and nasty. These days, you really can't tell the difference between a digitally printed book and a traditionally printed book, which has opened up the opportunity for self-published authors to print fewer copies. So, like you say, it's all really about the definition of, like I say, what's the definition of hybrid?
Because, Publish Central, when you have an author, this does not end up on the spine.
So it does, but it is entirely at the author's discretion. So these two books do have it. That is actually a conversation we have with the authors. So we say to them, look, it just looks like a real publisher kind of thing in inverted commas. If you've got our logo rather than your business logo on the spine. So.
And 9 out of 10 of your authors opt to have your logo, would you say?
No, certainly not 9 out of 10. Probably 50 or 60% kind of thing. Having said that, all three here that I've got to do it. But a lot of our authors, not a lot, some prefer to have their own company logo on the spine, which we have a conversation with them and we explain the advantages and disadvantages of both. Again, I'm not at all fussed. I'm not trying to push our logo on them.
Yeah.
It's entirely up to them. We give them the choice, and like say, we explain the advantages and disadvantages each way, and we let them decide.
So my sticking point in these conversations remains the stigma around self-publishing. And to me, what you're doing is custom publishing, because when you say I've got a book coming out, the first question, it's not vindictive or anything in most cases, is who is your publisher?
Yes.
And people don't want to say I'm self-published because there's a lack of validation. And it doesn't mean it's not an incredible book, but it's the stigma. I don't think stigma around words goes away. I think our use of the word goes away. If we think about different terms for disability, we need to continually change them, So my thing is that for authors, if it's hybrid publishing, hybrid is actually a buzzword in the tech world.
Yeah.
But I prefer the term hybrid publisher, although I don't retain royalties, because yes, my clients talk about me as their publisher, Hembury Books as their publisher, and they prefer that. And it's quite a big piece. And so if I know that hybrid publishing usually involves keeping the royalties, but most people, I feel like in Australia, maybe we could work with the definition of hybrid publishing rather than, and they're just not self-published. That is not accurate. They are not solo in any sense of the word. They are actually, it's more of a boutique experience, custom experience than they could get at a traditional publisher. And I do their launch and everything. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. I think the language around this has been really interesting over the last few years. I made a bit of an effort a few years ago to start steering away from the term self-published, just to...
What did you replace it with?
Just publishing. So just saying to our authors, you're the publisher, you're publishing your book. It doesn't matter whether you're self-publishing or traditional publishing. So just to get them to think differently about it. I can say with my hand on my heart, I used to be managing editor of John Wiley & Sons. We produce books to the same standards as the major publishers. So we use literally the same editors, the same designers, the same printers. If that had a penguin logo on the spine, you'd say, yeah, of course. So
it's beautiful.
Yeah. So that's what we do, try and deal with our authors in that way. You're absolutely right about the stigma around self-publishing still exists. It's gotten a lot better in the last few years.
Yeah.
But it's definitely still there. Most of the authors we work with have kind of got over that because they've done their homework by the time they come to us. They realize that for business publishing, self-publishing is absolutely the way to go. And traditional publishers, unfortunately, are shooting themselves in the foot a lot in the last few years. And we know numerous high-profile authors who've left their traditional publishers to go self-publishing in the last few years because the industry is all trending that way. It's like I say, it's so much more accessible these days for self-publishers. You can do books to the same standards. And like the movie industry and photography before them, publishers are responding very, very slowly. So
I know the way we consume music, and if you're an independent musician, like everyone's like, wow, that's even cooler. Like you're not with one of the major labels.
Yeah, exactly.
There's still this stigma, but I believe that the traditional publishing is not contributing to, well, why would they? But, it needs to change. But the thing is, for me, I for a while, I thought, okay, I'll say on LinkedIn, Hembury Books is a publisher, but I also need to be completely transparent. I'm not masquerading as a traditional publisher, but I don't want to say self-publishing because I feel that people don't understand the potential and how amazing it is. So I'm going with hybrid publisher until someone tells me I can't say that, because I know hybrid publishers have a bad rap in some circles, but I will be the good one.
Yes, absolutely. That's the way we see it as well. I still get to this day, people sometimes go, oh, self-publishing. And it's like, well, no, it's come a long way in all that time. And all those bad stories you hear, that's the other companies. And if they're doing that, that's what makes us the good self-publishing company, because we're not doing that. So, having said that, we do want to, lift the reputation overall of self-publishing and that kind of thing. It's one of the reasons we started the Business Book Awards, was to really help self-publishers compete with the major publishers on that kind of stage. So, which they have been. I think we've had 5 years now. I think self-publishers have won it 2 years. Wiley won it one. I can't remember all the years now, but yeah, we've had self-publishers win it a few years. So
I want to ask you about that. What year did you set it up? I think that's just fantastic.
So we're going. This is our 6th year, so you'd have to count backwards. I can't remember now. It's gone so quick. 1998, I guess it'd have to be around about there. Does that sound right? 1998.
How many years?
No, not 1998. Oh my God, what am I saying? 2018.
2018.
Yeah.
Okay, pre-COVID.
I don't know what else.
Why? And the awards are held in Melbourne?
So they're run from Melbourne. Anybody in Australia can enter. So Andrew and I get together and have just a general catch up once a month, and we bounce ideas around. And there's business book awards in the UK who are run by, I don't know if you know Rethink Press. They're a self-publishing company that are probably hybrid, actually, talking about all the terminology, that operate in the UK. And we know Lucy, who runs the awards there and runs Rethink Press. Yeah. We'd had conversations with her. They were making noises about coming to Australia with the awards and starting an Australian Business Book Awards. So Andrew and I were like, we should beat them to it, kind of thing, because that's a big coming in and stomping on our ground kind of thing. So it went from an idea to reality very, very quickly. We were, like I say, very much motivated to, sorry, Lucy, if you ever hear this, she's probably figured this out already. Very motivated to make sure we got in first. We have been over the moon with the response. So we've gone from, we had 33 entries or something the first year, which we were like, oh yeah, that's respectable for the first year. It's gone something like 30, 50, 70, 130 entries or something like that. So we confidently get over 100 entries now. We've donated over $50,000 to the Indigenous Literacy Foundation, which is very important for us. I don't know how any awards of any kind can have credibility if somebody's making a profit off them. So it was very important from us for day one that any money we did make was donated. So yeah.
So what's going to be money spinner? You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's I to be honest, to be honest, I don't know how they have any credibility if you're making a profit off your awards. It just makes no sense to me at all. But so we get money from a few sources. We've got several sponsors. We're always looking for more. So if anybody wants to sponsor, let me know.
Can you tell me the names of a couple of sponsors so people get an idea?
Yeah, for sure. So our biggest sponsor over the years has been Smart WFM. So they I always have to think that Smart Workforce Management. So Jared's been a very, 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 very big supporter of the awards. We've had a lot of our small business honestly, a lot of our authors actually enter as well. So they can't sponsor the year that they enter, if that makes sense, because you can't, obviously that's a conflict. But we have Ocean Reef Publishing. I don't know if you know Ocean, but if you're looking for people to interview for your podcast, have a chat to Ocean. He's partnership publishing, he calls it, actually, based on our conversation about hybrid publishing. That's his language, partnership publishing. So he's been a very big supporter over the years. And then just lots of little ones kind of around the edges kind of thing, a lot of smaller ones each year.
Because sponsoring it as an author, as a business author, that's another fantastic brand opportunity for your own brand.
Absolutely. So we have a major sponsor every year who usually chips in $10,000, something like that. And then there's lower level sponsorships of $2,000 and $1,000. It is, for any small business owner or small business author, it is absolutely putting you smack in front of your target market. So, we've had, we've had 130, 140 entries. So, that's, and then all the people who tune into the ceremony, which is, that's getting bigger each year. We're working hard on getting more media this year. So all those sorts of things, for anyone interested in sponsoring, it is a great way to get in front of your target audience if your target audience is small business owners.
Amazing. Okay. All right. Now let's just go with a final question on
Yes.
there's two parts of the question. Is distribution usually a challenge for self-published authors, and how do you kind of help your clients with that? Because to me, it's the missing jigsaw piece puzzle.
It absolutely is. Yeah, no, you're spot on. To be honest, putting the book together is the easy part. I often say that to authors at the beginning and they don't quite believe you. It's like, yeah, it is, trust me. Distribution's definitely the challenge. So how we solve that for our authors, like I mentioned, we've got what we call our 4 distribution channels. So in terms of ebook and print on demand, we do the whole Ingram setup for them. In terms of audiobook, we're not doing the audiobooks ourselves yet, but we've got an audiobook partner we refer them to. The big one is bookshop distribution. So as a self-publisher, it's really, really hard to get bookshop distribution. So the way we manage that is we work with Woods Lane, who I'm sure you know. So we were with Dennis Jones, as you know, a few years ago, folded their tent. So Woods Lane work with us like a traditional publisher. So having had all this conversation about we're not a traditional publisher, which we're not, Woods Lane work with us as if we are. So from their point of view, we submit, we submit our new titles to them. So, 3 or 4 months in advance, the usual. It doesn't matter to Woods Lane that they're individual self-publishers because they just deal with us. They are happy to do that with us because they know we only produce good books. They're not going to get, self-published, rubbish that's just not up to scratch. So any author who signs up with us, that's actually a pretty good, and I'm going to hopefully not have this sound like a sales pitch, a pretty good advantage you get signing up with us that we can guarantee you bookshop distribution. Yeah. So why that's such an advantage is if you're an individual self-publisher and you approach either a distributor or a bookstore directly, odds are they won't even talk to you. And there's a very good reason for that. Sorry?
It's too time consuming to deal
Exactly with. Right, yeah. They have to deal with one client who's got one book, maybe 2. It's probably not going to sell very well. The person probably doesn't really know what they're doing. And it's just a whole lot of hassle that's probably going to sell overall 20 books to the person's, parents and next door neighbors kind of thing. So it's just not worth it for them to take on individual self-published clients, which is totally fair enough. But if a company like us, we aggregate all of I think we've got, 120 authors, something like that, who do bookshop distribution. Woods Lane can just treat us like a publisher with 120 authors. They don't have to deal with those 120 people individually. So it's definitely a challenge. Bookshop distribution's not as important as it used to be, I don't think. I think,
my ears.
10 or 15 years ago, it was like pretty much essential. But these days with everybody, everybody buys from Amazon, everybody buys from Booktopia. We have a lot of authors who don't do bookshop distribution because these days being online, I won't say it's as good, but it's almost as good these days. So what I say to authors, if they're considering taking up bookshop distribution or not, is do you want to cover absolutely every single distribution option? Like, do you want to make sure you get every single possible reader you can? Then yeah, you've got to do bookshop distribution. If you're happy, because obviously there's extra cost involved for them, there's extra books to print, they've got to pay for the service. But if you're happy with kind of, 95% of the market, like having Amazon and Booktopia and all that kind of thing, then these days you don't really need it.
I think I'm being perhaps obnoxious when I say bookstores don't sell many books these days.
Not as many as they used to. No, we very much, we send our authors a whole stack of information about signing up for bookshop distribution. I've literally got in big bold letters, don't expect to sell many books kind of thing. It's like, it's not like it used to be. A lot of our authors aren't even fussed at all about selling books. Like, it's just not about that for them. So it doesn't matter whether it's bookstores or Amazon or any of those, they're not fussed about selling books. It's all about, the promotional tool for their business.
Getting them into the hands of the right. If you're a business owner, you want quality of the people who are. It's not quantity of units. It's I need this influential person to read my book.
Exactly right.
Be worth a huge amount to them.
Yep. Spot on.
If 100 of the right people read their book, my gosh, they are.
Yeah. We have authors who, Andrew talks about this all the time. He gets people who read his book. He's got some contact pages at the back, gets to the end of his book and literally ring him up and go, I want to sign up and be a client. So if one person reads this book and becomes a $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 client for Andrew, does he care whether he made $5 selling a book? Of course he doesn't. So
yeah, it's fascinating. So again, as an author with my first book, I wanted to be in bookstores, and that's the dream for a lot of authors, and that's completely fair enough. And I signed up to the Australian Society of Authors, which is a way that self-published authors can then use the distribution deal with John Reed Books.
Yes.
When I broke it down, when my excitement calmed down a little bit, I broke it down and went, I am losing per copy.
Yeah.
So that did not work. So then I printed 500 copies in Hong Kong to try to bring the unit cost down. And it's still kind of, I think it was like less than $1 or something that I would actually get. And then I didn't sell many copies. Yeah. So I feel like if it doesn't make financial sense, if it's not a good business proposition, then the bookstores can just order from Ingram Spark. And if they don't want to do that, some of them are like, I know one, they say, we only have an American account. We won't get an Australian account. Well, that's
I know bookstores who just flat out don't order from Ingram as well. Yeah.
That is their prerogative.
Yeah.
And they are ignoring an increasingly important part of the market. And how many customers will have to come in and say, I want this book, and they might open an account with Ingram Spark.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Our authors, we encourage our authors to give away books for free. Like I say to them at the start of the project, that they often, come to us and go break it down like, if I sell this many and I make this much per copy, and do I make more if people buy an ebook, and they're crunching all the numbers and stuff. And I say to them at the start, look, don't worry about it. I said, forget all of that. I said, you don't understand it now, but once your book comes out, you're not going to care about any of that. What's going to happen is, like I say, you're going to get one book in the right hands, and they're going to sign up for as a $30,000 client. And then you go, oh, that's what it's all about. So, I won't say we discourage our authors from worrying about sales, but we do definitely emphasize that for most of our authors, that's not where the value is. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're a writer of memoirs, I understand it's a bit different, and the dream is to live off royalties, but many indie authors do. They're making millions of dollars every year. That's another ball game. That's got to be author driven, and you've got to have those amazing direct sales and your Shopify account, and you're making buckets of money.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like the printing. It all comes back to, you've got to start with the end in mind. So you say to the authors, well, what are you trying to do with your book? And, for some authors, like you say, the dream is, I want to sell them all myself and make $1 million. It's like, well, that's hard, but it is possible. And if that is your dream, then probably bookshops are a good idea for you. But it's all, like I say, same with the printing. You've always got to start at the other end and work backwards and figure out what you're trying to do when your book comes out.
Yeah, amazing. Michael, it was really good to talk to you, really interesting. Thanks for being so generous with your time and answering all the burning questions.
Oh, you're most welcome. It's so much fun. Like I say, I've been listening to your podcast and I've been enjoying it. I've been very excited to be on here.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot.
No worries. Thanks, Jessica.